In today's episode, we'll be showing off the new wheels, detailing best practices for shadowlining trim.
I have not done this before, and this is probably the wrong way to do it.
Quickly smoking the headlights with vinyl, and installing our new bra.
Full mask, aka a bra. Yes.
Stick around to the end to see the results on the car and hear my practical recommendations for this leg of the project. When I inherited my E30, it was bone stock and pretty mechanically sound, but the exterior needed some work to bring it back up to snuff. As happens, this quickly snowballed from restoration to modification, upgrading headlights and grills, smoke turn signals and side markers to match the bumper trim, 16-inch BBS RS style wheels, etc. These simple and clean OEM plus changes have resulted in some of the best looking and nostalgia-inducing years of the car's life. This modification list has continued to grow, however, and I've often had small experiments with changing up the style. I've dabbled in shadowlining on a couple occasions and tried on several sets of wheels over the years, but it's always returned back to its basically OEM plus form. Looking back through these different variations though, I can't help but wonder if there's a look in there that might have knocked my socks off if I just committed and gone whole hog, which is what brings us here today. As the car sits, it has essentially a 50-50 split between shadowline and polished metal. My tendency has always been towards the polished metal accent, but it's now time to shake up the status quo. In this build, we're finally going to be diving into the deep end and committing to a full shadowline-oriented aesthetic. I've been running these BBS RS knockoffs for almost 10 years now and honestly love them. I've yet to find another wheel to replace them, and let me tell you, I've tried. Over the years, I've marked 2 of them with a small amount of curb rash and ended up losing one of the caps that holds the waffles in place. As a result, I can no longer run the waffles at all, lest I strangely have one missing. Add to this the fact that the tires are 10 years old, which is about double their suggested lifespan, and it may be time for an upgrade. By pure luck, during my daily Facebook Marketplace scan, I stumbled upon a deal I couldn't pass up: Style 5s. Their lack of polished lip makes the coloring a perfect fit for this build. Faces are clean, no curb rash, and they come with brand new E30 appropriate tires. Barrels, on the other hand, are a different story. We needed quite a bit of cleaning and will realistically need to be stripped and repainted to look good again. Now, the Style 5s don't fit an E30 in stock form due to the 5x120 bolt pattern. These have been filled and re-drilled to 4x100, which to me is really one of the only ways to do this swap. There are other ways to make these fit, but each introduce their own complication. Anyways, this is a topic for another video. There is one small modification needed to run these wheels, and that is installing an 8mm spacer in front to clear the struts. A spacer of this size will also require longer wheel bolts, but I would highly recommend just upgrading to wheel studs instead. With the now wider track up front, I also installed 10mm spacers in the rear to bring them at least closer to being flush. I know I barely grazed the surface here, but there's way too much to cover to really explain how this all works. So if you want to hear more about spacers, studs, 5-lug swaps, what wheels and offsets fit, or anything else along these lines, let me know in the comments. For now, I've linked all the parts I used to make this work in the description below. There are a number of ways to shadowline the trim on your E30 or any other vehicle, but in my instance, I want to easily be able to revert back to the stock look. If I were trying to do this more permanently, I'd probably go with something like SEM Trim Black, although that then begs the question of fading due to UV, which is a topic for another episode. You could also look into wrapping the trim, but that requires much more skill, takes way longer to do, and for something like window trim will require a large, expensive piece of vinyl. So for me, the choice becomes obvious: peelable paint. Several brands have popped up over the years with their own offering, but when it comes to a matte style paint that matches the E30 trim well, Plastidip cannot be beat. Although one of its main benefits is being easily removable, I found over the years that it's also extremely durable And being as thick as it is makes it very easy and forgiving to apply for someone new to painting. If you're going to be painting on the car, you should be getting some blue painter's tape, probably about 3/4 of an inch to an inch in width. Spread cutter is a paint prep degreaser that you can paint on directly after using, so this eliminates any chance of interaction with a degreaser that may leave a residue behind. So this is what I would recommend using. Finally, depending on where you're going to be painting these parts, you should also use some newspaper. I collect the newspapers when they come to my house for this exact task. There are really two places where you can paint these parts. First place is on the car. It's a lot faster, it's a lot easier, requires a lot less work, and there's no chance of breaking anything when you try to remove it. Trim, for example, you have clips that are very easy to break. It can be really annoying as then you'll have to source new clips to fix it when you go to reinstall. The other option is to remove the part from the vehicle and paint it off the car. This has much better coverage. It gets rid of any potential paint lines due to masking tape, and it will also eliminate any chance of the paint lifting from the part. This is going to be just an overall better way to do it, but of course it is more time consuming. There is potential to break parts and or clips upon removal. You make sure to lift any to-be painted edges off of the surface you're painting on so they don't accidentally adhere. This can ruin your work when going to remove the part once it's dry. Painting process will be pretty similar regardless of where you're painting it. Of course, the first thing you need to do is prepare the part for paint. You want to mask any surfaces that you may need to, and also degrease the part fully and properly. Once you're ready to paint, you're going to want to shake your can first. I'm a big fan of the wrist twist method. It feels like a lot less work and a lot faster than the up and down shake weight method that most people use. This ensures the paint is properly mixed and a consistent color. Also make sure to do a quick spray off the part to bleed the can before you start laying paint down. The first coat that you do is going to be the lightest coat by far. You really aren't looking to get much coverage with it. All you're trying to do is lay something down that later coats can adhere to. Make sure that you're using long, consistent strokes, but the way that you manage to have a lighter coat is by doing a much faster stroke than you usually would. In between coats, you want to give the paint about 5 to 10 minutes to dry. You do want it to be pretty well dry before you start painting again. Your second coat is going to be much heavier than your first. You are going for coverage with this coat. Make sure that once again to use the long consistent strokes, just go slower with your strokes this time. Also make sure that you are getting full coverage on the part. That means there are different angles that you may need to move the can into to hit different portions, different surfaces of that part. If you're painting it off the car, what I like to do is a southeast, northwest type of directionality to make sure that I'm hitting all the points, and it does give you that full coverage. The third coat will likely be a little bit thicker than the second. Usually the third coat is going to be your last coat with Plastidip. You do usually have full coverage by then. The final thing you want to worry about, though, with Plastidip specifically, is the thickness in terms of removal. If you paint your coats on too thin, when it comes time to remove it, it's going to come off in very small pieces. This is extremely annoying. I've done this once before. I painted a set of wheels and I did not do a thick enough coat, and it took hours to remove it all. You want to make sure your coats are thick enough that when you go to pull them off, they come off in one large piece. Always err on the side of going a little bit thicker. Alas, the results were crap. As you can see here, I don't believe that I degreased this part quite enough, and you can see that the paint did not adhere at this one edge, which means you have to essentially strip that and redo it. Alas, I committed the cardinal sin of using gloss. Say it with me, always matte finish. In the end, I decided I was going to fully remove the trim. The masking lines where I had put tape on were causing some of the paint to lift at the edges. It just didn't look great overall, so I had to remove the trim. It was actually much easier than I thought it would be. This is where it's totally worthwhile to have a trim removal kit. I spent the first 20 years of my car working life using screwdrivers for tasks like this. It scratched the living hell out of a lot of paint, usually in places you wouldn't easily see it, but sometimes on exterior paint. Learn from my anguish and just invest in a plastic trim removal kit now. It's super cheap and will save you hundreds or thousands on ruined paint in the future. The lower window trim, you simply need to take a plastic trim removal tool, wedge it between the door and the trim, create a gap, and then pull it upwards, and it should come out completely. The clips are all metal here, and so it's very, very unlikely that they'll actually break. For the upper front window, you simply need to take a plastic trim tool and lift at the front edge. You essentially want to get under it and leverage it towards you. Once you get that lower front edge started, you simply want to pivot the entire thing upwards. And this will help release the top portion. The back is also very easy to come off. Get a plastic trim removal tool under this back portion here. It then will fully come out. You just go along slowly and kind of try to move it all in one piece. It's very easy to do. The painting process here is very straightforward. This doesn't make it easier for you to degrease the parts and get them degreased fully. It also reduces masking lines substantially. Only that rear portion actually has any masking lines at all, and results with the satin Plastidip brand paint are perfect. It turned out the finish on some of the Shadowline trim that I had already done became damaged. They do have a brush-on version of Plastidip, so I had the idea, why don't I spot treat with the brush-on paint, and that way I won't have to repaint the whole thing. It actually worked pretty okay, but it did kind of ruin the surface finish of the part. I then realized that I had one portion of the trim that I had yet to paint and wondered how well it would work to brush on from start to finish an entire part. Long story short, the finish on this was absolutely atrocious.
This is so bad.
Yeah, there's not really a whole lot more to say about that. It was extremely unpleasant and should be avoided at all costs. Half a star.
Smoking the headlights with vinyl is sure to be a temporary thing, as if I end up liking the look, my plan is to swap out the smoke version of my current Depot Smileys, so this will not be best practice by any means. As well, take this all with a grain of salt. I have very little experience and have done almost no research on how to apply vinyl, so I don't really have much in the way of expertise. But it worked out. I started by drawing and cutting templates using extra wheel spacers that were about 1 inch larger in diameter than the headlights, to give them room to cover the sides of the lenses. Now I know what you're thinking. Didn't you just say Plastidip is easier and better than vinyl? Well, in some cases, yes. And yes, Plastidip does have a smoke translucent version of their paint, but I've tried it before and it is not good. I ended up buying a sheet of 12 by 48 inch Vivid Air Smoke Black headlight tint for $10. But I'm convinced that there are better options out there, as this one has a bit more purple to it than I'd prefer. But I've linked it in the description if that's your thing. Start by applying the vinyl to the middle of the lens and push bubbles and creases outward. If you run into trouble, lift the problem area and reapply to start over. Heat helps get rid of bubbles and creases and shrinks the vinyl down onto the part. The heat gun I purchased years ago from Harbor Freight does a great job with this. This heat gun is actually the perfect example of how I think about buying tools. There are a number of common sayings when it comes to making purchases. You get what you pay for is the most famous. Another one I hear a lot, especially in regard to tools, is buy nice or buy twice. These quotes absolutely do make sense in some situations, but I think that for tools in particular, I really resonate with the idea to buy cheap first and replace it with something nicer if you need to. It doesn't roll off the tongue, but it makes a lot more sense for the DIYer who doesn't do this as their profession. What you'll find in some cases with something like this dirt cheap 2-setting heat gun is that sometimes dirt cheap is all you need. I use it almost exclusively for heat shrink and rarely on random projects like this. Buying the expensive 15 heat setting cordless hotter than the surface of the sun version of this gun would be a waste of money for me. And even more importantly, if it ends up breaking or you realize you do need the more expensive version, you've now learned what features and capabilities are actually important to look for in that tool. There's nothing worse than buying the expensive version and realizing it's missing all the features you actually needed. This is the case for the box cutter I'm using on this project. It's one of those nice metal heavy-duty versions that uses an actual razor blade. I've had this thing for years and frankly have suffered through using it for the vast majority of that time. It hasn't been sharp in forever. I lost the replacement blades gosh knows how long ago, and the blades are a huge pain in the ass to replace. I recently upgraded to a box cutter of a similar shape with snap-off blades that you get much longer use out of and that requires no tools to change. That's a great thing to learn, and you usually have to learn it the hard way. Okay, sorry, we're way off topic. Once the front of the lens is covered smoothly, use a trim tool to press around the sides and wedge the vinyl edges between the lens and the headlight trim ring. Once you get it all tucked, you're good to go. The fog lights were even easier than the headlights. Just cut out the basic size and shape needed and slap them on. Then use a little heat to promote adhesion and call it a day.
Got a little something that came in the mail today. What do we think it is?
The last modification is one that my dad ran for several years and is one of the few aftermarket additions he ever put on the car, so obviously it holds meaning for me. And not so coincidentally, it fits the theme of this build perfectly. A bra. I did some searching and found that the most common offering, which you can buy on eBay and Amazon, is from Cobra Auto Accessories out of Turkey. Purchasing from either source should do you well, but eBay was a little cheaper, so they're who I went with. The bra came quickly despite being shipped internationally, and looks and feels like a nice quality product. Install was super straightforward, just slide it onto the front of the hood and affix 4 straps on the underside. 2 of the straps were hooked to the hood guide brackets, which was simple. The other 2 required a small amount of creative thinking, which I ended up affixing to trim clips that hold the hood liner in place, although one was missing. Like a dummy, I didn't use the clip tool that came with the trim removal set and struggled with a screwdriver. I swear, I always have to do things the hard way. But yeah, process was super easy, bra looks to be nice quality, and it fit great. I'll definitely make a follow-up if I run into any issues, but truth be told, I've had it installed for a few months now, and it seems great. Altogether, I think the look is fine. The headlight trim clearly needs to be painted, which I'll need to remove the headlights to do, so we'll revisit that in another episode. The wheels look great, potentially even better looking than the old wheels, so they get high marks. The Shadowline trim clearly fits the look of the car and matches the pinstripe really well, but I'm not quite sold on it. I do love the bra for nostalgia's sake, but it really creates such a large, dark block in conjunction with the grills on the front of the car. I kind of feel like it needs something to break that up a bit. Kidneys honestly look better than I was anticipating, but I'm not convinced the entire thing wouldn't look even better with them less polished. Plus, it could be what's needed to break up that bra grill dominance in the front. I actually kind of like the headlights and fog lights being smoked. This could be the same thing as the kidneys. It could be better undarkened to offset things a bit. Anyways, this is still all new to my eyes. They need a little bit of time to acclimate. I need to get used to the look overall. I think what definitely does stand out to me is that the rear end really seems lacking now that the front has gotten so much attention. Well, I'm curious what you guys think. Is there anything that you like or don't like so far? Any suggestions of what I should add? Or maybe what looks totally wrong? Let me know. I like to distill some of the takeaways from what I've covered in the video and give some high-level practical recommendations. Number 1, install wheel studs. It makes everything about removing, mounting, and playing with the offset of wheels so much easier. Number 2, use matte finished Plastidip brand peelable paint. It's good for short and long-term projects, super forgiving to apply, mega easy to remove, matches stock trim really well. It's cheap, it's durable. What else do people want? Number 3, degrease trim really well before painting. Window trim is usually within the line of fire of any rubber trim or store products you may be using when cleaning your car, and that may ruin the paint job if you don't fully degrease it. It just makes sense to take extra time to do that. Remove your window trim to paint it. You get a better finish, better coverage, and no chance of pulling away from the seams where you've noticed. Don't ever brush on Plastidip. Just know. Buy a set of proper trim removal tools. Stop scratching your painted surfaces and have the right tool for the job. It makes all the difference. When it comes to tools, buy cheap first and replace it with something nicer if you need to. That way you're not wasting money if you don't need to, and you know what to actually look for when buying the nicer version. I want to give an extra thank you if you made it this far in the video. I'm going to have a lot more content coming out in hopefully the near future for the E30 and the Z4. I've got the next 10 episodes already basically outlined. If you do want to see those as they drop, you might want to consider subscribing. You can also click the box on the left, which will bring you to the previous video. The box on the right can bring you to the next video, assuming that has dropped already. So this is future me talking to you, clearly. Anyways, once again, thanks so much. Hope to